So here we go into our lecture about hierarchy. So you're gonna see some slides while I'm introducing this whole thing, and it's not important that you hold on to these 12 things that are going to be flying in front of you. What's really key is later on when we get into the key elements and we're discussing in particular type hierarchy. So visual hierarchy is an important element in any design project. It's going to tell where to look and what things on the screen or printed page are most important. Hierarchy gives readers a sense of how to actually read the material from start to finish with visual cues and flow. Type hierarchy organizes and gives order to the text elements in your design, just as web designers and web developers use something called header tags, which are like H1, H2, and H3, and so on, to organize the importance of the text. Visual hierarchy uses visual cues. In addition, type hierarchy helps readers scan text, reading bits of type faster in chunks that look alike. Generally, English language readers start at the top left and read across and down. Type is often organized to mirror this behavior. But what if the biggest and boldest text is midway down the page? Well, then a reader will start there and go back to the top of the page and continue the normal reading behavior. Hierarchy is important because it allows the designer to determine what someone will likely read first, what they will read second, and so on. Because of this, the designer can create type in such a way that he or she knows what information is likely to be received and in what order. As creating hierarchy is important to designers, it is equally important to readers. Good visual hierarchy tells us what is important, making reading much easier. For example, you know that the headline is the most important part of a story. It's attention grabbing because it is the biggest, followed by subheads, then body text. For scannability purpose, you could read the big text to get an idea if the article would interest you before investing a bunch of time in the copy. And then the subheads let you figure out some key points within that text. And then if you decide at that point to read it, then you can read the text. So how do we create hierarchy? There is no one-step solution to creating visual hierarchy with text. It can be created with size, weight, color, texture, typeface choices and combinations, orientation, and space, or a combination of all of that. We will start with size. One of the simplest ways to establish hierarchy with type is through size. Readers will often see the biggest type first and start reading from there. In relation to size, scale is equally important. To create distinctive hierarchy, sizes must have significant variance in relationship to other type on the page. The thing to keep in mind is that different typefaces may scale differently. So just changing the point size may not be enough. You need to look at how typefaces work together to ensure the size and scale are properly balanced. So how do you get started with creating the right size and scale of type for a project? Well, you start with the main body text and go from there. And for the text elements that are used to really draw people in, go big or go home. Here are a few percentages that can help you get started, with main body being somewhere around 11 points. The main headers are supposed to be about 250% bigger. Secondary headers 175% bigger. Navigation elements 165% bigger. Secondary navigation or menus is 140% bigger. So, of course, those are percentages because we're not basing it on a particular font size because we know that body copy is supposed to be around 11 or 10 points for good, effective type. Typeface. After size, typefaces are the most used element in terms of creating typographic hierarchy. The key is to have contrast between typefaces. This is one reason that designers often select one serif and one sans serif typeface for a project. For the best combinations, look for typefaces that are different in weight but have a similar tone or feel. If you are using rounded typefaces, stick to letter forms with similar shapes in the O's, for example. Opt for typefaces with similar X heights if the style will be used in line with one or another throughout the entire project. And we have talked about this in the past where like Palatino and Helvetica are a good combination. Helvetica and Garamond are a good combination. Okay, because the letters kind of match the X height. It has a good feel, but it has stark contrast in what you're trying to get across. Weight. The thickness of strokes in the type you select for a project can create hierarchy as well. The thicker the typeface, the more bold and bigger it appears. Light, condensed, and thin typefaces often appear smaller than they actually are. Bold, ultra, and hammerhead typefaces can appear larger than the point size may represent. How large or small a typeface appears by weight is also relative to the other typefaces used in the project. So pairing thick and thin typefaces immediately causes a sense of hierarchy, with the thick style carrying the look of more important, often even though it is actually smaller on the display. Color. Using color can also add emphasis and increase weight to type. Think about some of the color rules you learned as a child. Warm colors, the reds, the yellows, the browns will have more pop, while cool colors like blues, purples, and grays will fade to the back. Warm to the front, cold to the back. When using color to establish hierarchy, consider the hues used for the foreground, type, and background. Color contrast will also play an important role. The more saturated or brightest colors will often lift off the screen against more muted tones. Type orientation. How text rests in a layout next in relationship to other text can impact the overall hierarchy. Typically, most text is oriented horizontally in a straight line across the screen. But why not place text vertically? Okay, this change in orientation will bring the focus to those words or blocks of text, making it appear to be the most important element. Tilting, twisting, or otherwise altering the shape of text in any way can achieve the same effect. It should be noted that most designers often avoid these type tricks except for a very few circumstances. Space. White space can make type appear bigger and more readable. Lack of white space can make it feel tighter and smaller. Use space to your advantage when creating a sense of hierarchy. Think about the space you use between lines of text. Think about kerning for the biggest type styles. Think about the spatial relationship between letters and the edge of the canvas. Think about the relationships between type of different sizes, styles, and colors. Every single space can impact your hierarchical scale. Keep similar type grouped closer together and with less space than unrelated items. And design your space so the text falls in a distinct order. Bigger, bolder, brighter text elements often need more space than smaller, simpler text blocks. Texture. Texture is a loose concept in terms of type. No, we're not talking about putting a texture inside of lettering. What we are referring to is creating a pattern of texture with the way the letters and words rest on a page or screen. Type has a color in itself. With blocks of text, you can end up with a patterned look. To establish more hierarchy, break that pattern. This can be accomplished using one of the tools already mentioned or by changing something as simple as the alignment of a single block of text. This change to the overall texture of text can have a real impact on how it is perceived. Be careful, though, of too many textural changes because at that point they can become distracting. Use them infrequently. Levels. While some projects call for complex hierarchies, most designs can be successful with 3 levels of typographic hierarchy. Those levels are primary type, secondary type, tertiary type. Okay? Primary type is often the typography on the page with the most visual weight, such as main headers or display quotes. The purpose of primary type is to bring readers into the overall design. Secondary type is everything else that is not the main content. This can include captions, subheads, and navigational or static type elements. Tertiary type is the main body copy. There is one thing to remember about tertiary copy. It must be readable. Little else matters when it comes to the design style of this type level. Art type is type used as a graphic element. It falls outside the actual realm of type, is much more visual. This can include banners or logos. It can include images composed of lettering or any other ornate or heavily designed typographic element. Typically, art type consists of only a single word of a letter and is not part of what people are expected to read in the overall design. Okay? Art type could be a very fancy drop cap. That would be considered art type. So the conclusion is organizing type can be both fun and truly very challenging. By combining techniques and different type effects and styles, you can easily achieve a flow with only type. Remember to consider the relationship between size, weight, color, texture, typeface choices and combinations, orientation, and space when creating an outline. Think about how people read and digest information when using these techniques so that the copy is organized and flows in a logical format for the most usable typographic design. Now we're discussing typographic hierarchy. The same basic concepts apply to normal hierarchy. A composition has to have a primary draw, a secondary concept and a tertiary concept. What am I supposed to look at first? What am I supposed to see next? And what is the final thing I'm supposed to see? Is it supposed to hook me all the way back into the original concept? When we look at posters, what makes us see the poster on the board? Then what draws us into, once we're at the poster, what's the one thing that we can see in 8 seconds, or not even 8 seconds, just in an instant, okay? That's the next most important thing. Exactly when and where it is, those are tertiary concepts. You got our attention, you gave us something to do, now tell us a little bit more about it, okay? So there is your lecture on your first lecture on hierarchy, because it is a critical design concept.